The voicemail was still on my phone. I hadn't deleted it. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me needed proof that it actually happened. That a human being, a man who shares my blood, actually said those words out loud and hit send. Grandpa's not going to make it through the month. We've already talked to the attorney. There's nothing for you to do. Don't come up here and make this harder than it needs to be. That was my uncle's voice. Flat. Rehearsed. Like he'd been practicing it in the car on the way to the lake house. I was 26 when I got that message, working a warehouse job in Phoenix, splitting a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate I barely knew, eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week. My grandfather, my mom's dad, the man who taught me to drive in an empty parking lot when I was 14 and slipped me 20s for emergencies, my entire childhood, was dying 4 states away in the house he built with his own hands. And my uncle was telling me not to come. I came anyway. I drove 17 hours straight. Stopped once for gas and a coffee that tasted like hot cardboard. Pulled up to my grandfather's house in rural Tennessee at 6 in the morning with a duffel bag and $200 in my checking account and no plan at all. The front door was unlocked. That should have been my first sign. Inside, the house was wrong. Not messy exactly, just stripped. The good lamp from the living room was gone. The antique clock my grandmother had kept on the mantel for 40 years, the one Grandpa called the only thing in this house worth more than me, was gone. Little rectangular dust shadows on shelves where things used to be. I found my grandfather in his bedroom. He was awake, barely. His breathing was slow and labored, and his lips were dry. There was a half-empty glass of water on the nightstand that looked like it had been sitting there since yesterday. The oxygen concentrator in the corner of the room was running. But when I checked the tubing, it had come loose from his mask at some point and nobody had fixed it. He'd been breathing room air for God knows how long. I fixed the tubing. I refilled the water. I sat on the edge of his bed and said, "Hey, Grandpa, I'm here." He opened his eyes, took a second to focus. And then, very slowly, he smiled. "I knew you'd come," he said. "They told me you weren't." I asked him where everyone was. He said my uncle and aunt had gone into town for breakfast. My cousin had driven down from Nashville the night before but left that morning before dawn. Said she had work, Grandpa told me. Voice dry with something that wasn't quite bitterness, wasn't quite humor. Something old and tired and already past surprise. I asked if he was okay. He said, "Help me sit up. There's something I need to show you before they get back." I helped him sit up against the headboard. He was lighter than I remembered. People shrink when they get sick? I'd heard that before. But I'd never really understood it until I felt it. The way he used to be a big man, wide-shouldered, slow-moving in that deliberate way that felt permanent, like a tree. Now I could feel his bones. He pointed to the closet. Top shelf, behind the wool blanket. Pull it out. I found it. A shoebox sealed with 2 rubber bands and a strip of masking tape with my name written on it in black marker. My name. Not my uncle's. Not my cousin's. Mine. I looked at him. "I put your name on it 8 months ago," he said. I was waiting to see if I was wrong about them. I wasn't. I sat back down on the bed and opened the box. The first thing inside was a folded letter, handwritten, 3 pages, dated 4 months earlier. His handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but still his. Those deliberate, old-fashioned capital letters he always used. The letter started, "If you're reading this, then I wasn't wrong. And I'm sorry for what you're about to find out about this family." I read it twice, then I sat very still for a moment. My grandfather had been a quiet man his whole life. Ran a small construction business for 30 years, sold it when he retired, lived simply. My grandmother died when I was 11. Everyone in the family talked about how Grandpa was fine, doing well, being strong. What nobody talked about, what I didn't know until I read that letter, was what happened to the money. My grandmother had life insurance, not a fortune, but real money. For $12,000, paid out in full 3 months after she died. My grandfather told me about it in the letter. Said he'd been planning to divide it evenly between his 2 kids, my mom and my uncle, when he passed. Had it set up in a small trust with a separate account for me, because I was his only grandchild from my mother's side and he promised her before she died that he'd look out for me. My mom died when I was 19. Car accident. She'd been on her way to pick me up from my first semester of college. I didn't know my grandfather had set up anything for me. Nobody told me. What happened, according to the letter, was this. About 2 years after my mom died, my uncle started visiting more. Brought his wife. Brought my cousin. Started talking about Grandpa's declining health, his need for consistent care, the difficulty of managing finances at his age. He hired a financial advisor, a friend of his, who suggested consolidating Grandpa's accounts for simplicity. He arranged for Grandpa to sign a durable power of attorney, explaining it as standard estate planning. Grandpa signed it. He told me in the letter that he trusted his son, that he was grieving my mother, and he wasn't thinking straight. That he looked back on that afternoon at the kitchen table, pen in his hand, and wished he could reach back through time and knock it out of his own fingers. Over the next 18 months, 43 separate withdrawals were made from his accounts. The trust account my grandmother's insurance money had funded was quietly dissolved. The money, the part earmarked for me, had been redirected into a joint account my uncle shared with my cousin. He'd kept records of all of it, not on a computer. On paper, in that shoebox, in that letter, handwritten copies of statements, dates, amounts, account numbers. He'd been collecting them for a year. His doctor had been helping him request copies of his financial records under the pretense of reviewing them himself. Behind the letter was a second envelope. Inside that envelope was a notarized affidavit, my grandfather's sworn statement of what had been done, witnessed by his doctor and his doctor's office manager, signed 6 weeks earlier. And behind that was a letter from an attorney in Nashville. Not my uncle's family attorney. A different one, an elder law attorney my grandfather had contacted on his own, by phone on a Tuesday morning when my uncle and aunt were both at work. The letter confirmed that his power of attorney had been revoked, that a new will had been drawn up, that the new will named me as sole beneficiary and executor of his estate, and that a formal complaint had already been filed with the state's Adult Protective Services. I looked up from the papers. My grandfather was watching me. When? I asked. I meant all of it. When did you do all this? When did you know? The revocation was filed 3 months ago, he said. They don't know yet. He paused to take a slow breath. That's why I needed you to come before they got back from breakfast. I heard a car door slam outside. I put everything back in the shoebox. I put the shoebox in my duffel bag. I sat back down in the chair by my grandfather's bed, and I was looking at my phone, apparently relaxed, when my uncle walked into the bedroom 2 minutes later smelling like bacon and black coffee. He stopped when he saw me. How did you? He caught himself, reset his expression. I didn't know you were coming. I drove up last night, I said. Wanted to see him. My uncle looked at my grandfather. My grandfather was looking at the ceiling. Well, my uncle said, it's good that you're here. He said it the way people say things they absolutely do not mean. His wife appeared in the doorway behind him. She said hello to me with the specific warmth of someone who has already decided they will be gracious, because it costs them nothing. My cousin arrived an hour later. She hadn't left for work after all. She'd driven to get coffee and come back. She walked in, saw me, and said, "Oh, hey," pulled out her phone and started scrolling. For the rest of that morning, I stayed calm. I helped Grandpa with breakfast. I refilled his water. I adjusted his pillows. I watched my uncle sit in the armchair by the window and scroll through his own phone and periodically check his watch. I watched my aunt rearrange things in the kitchen that didn't need rearranging. I watched my cousin take 3 separate phone calls in the hallway, voice lowered. At one point, my uncle said, casually, "You know, there's not really much to do here. The hospice nurse comes every other day. You didn't have to make the drive." I said I wanted to be here. He said, "Sure," and looked back at his phone. That afternoon, my grandfather slept. I sat with him. While he was sleeping, my uncle came to the doorway and said they were thinking about heading back the next morning. Nothing more we can do here right now, and asked if I was planning to stay. I said yes. He nodded slowly. Well, you should know that the house and everything in it is being managed through the estate. So if you need anything clarified about how things work here, you should probably talk to me. I looked at him. Okay, I said. He waited for me to say something else. I didn't. He left. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and read through every document in that shoebox again. All of it. The dates, the transfers, the amounts. I found the page in Grandpa's handwritten notes where he'd listed the contents of the trust that had been dissolved. Listed my name. Listed what had been meant for me. The number was $287,000. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I expected rage. Instead, I felt something quieter and colder. The particular feeling of understanding something completely, all the way down to its roots, of having the last piece of a puzzle you didn't know you were doing. They hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen it from a dead woman's wish for her son. They had taken something my grandmother and my grandfather had built quietly, over decades, and moved it, calmly, systematically, in 43 transactions, into their own pocket. And then they had come here, to this house, to wait for my grandfather to die so they could finish the job. I called the elder law attorney the next morning before anyone else was awake. She was expecting to hear from me. My grandfather had told her I would call when I arrived. She walked me through the next steps in 20 minutes. Clear, practical, no drama. Then I called a local notary. When my grandfather woke up, I told him what I'd done. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Good, he said. Now we wait. We didn't have to wait long. The mistake my uncle made was the safe. There was a small fireproof safe bolted to the floor in the back of my grandfather's closet. My uncle had been asking about it since they arrived. I'd heard him mention it to my aunt twice. Casual references disguised as practical concern. We should probably get that inventoried. For the estate. That evening, while my grandfather was resting and I was in the kitchen, my uncle came to me with a key. He said he'd found it in the junk drawer and thought it might go to the safe, and could I help him check just to make sure important documents are secured. I looked at the key. I recognized it. It was the same key I'd seen in the shoebox. The one my grandfather had put there deliberately. Sure, I said. Let's check. We went to the closet. My uncle crouched down and tried the key in the safe. It didn't fit. He tried it again. Still nothing. He said. Thought that was it. The safe's actually empty, I said. Thought that was it. The safe's actually empty, I said. He looked up at me. Grandpa moved everything important months ago, I said. I think you might already know that. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Long enough to be its own kind of confession. My uncle stood up. He was doing the calculation behind his eyes. How much do I know? How much can I deny? What's the play here? I could see him running it. I don't know what you think you found, he said carefully, but estate management is complicated. There are things you don't understand about the decisions that were made. Tell me, I said. He didn't. My cousin appeared in the hallway. She'd been listening. Her expression told me she'd known more than she pretended not to know. This is a family matter, she said. It is, I said. That's why I'm here. I went back to the kitchen. I sat down at the table. I picked up my phone and I opened the email the attorney had sent me that morning. The one with the attachments. I forwarded it to both of them, my uncle and my cousin, with no subject line and no message, just the attachments. The first attachment was the revocation of power of attorney. The second was the new will. The third was the APS complaint number and case reference. The fourth was a letter from the attorney informing them that they were now subjects of a civil financial exploitation claim, and that any further contact with my grandfather's accounts, property, or legal documents would constitute interference with an active legal proceeding. I heard my uncle's phone buzz on the counter. Then my cousin's. Then quiet. My uncle came back into the kitchen 4 minutes later. His face had changed. The careful blankness was gone, and what was underneath it wasn't what I expected. Not anger, not denial. Just a kind of deflation, like a man who had been holding something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down, not because he wanted to, but because his arms gave out. How long have you had this? He said. Long enough, I said. He sat down across from me. He didn't say anything for a while. My aunt appeared in the doorway. My cousin stood behind her. The four of us sat in my grandfather's kitchen, and the refrigerator hummed, and outside, a mockingbird was going through its whole repertoire like it didn't know anything had changed. This will destroy the family, my uncle finally said. I thought about my mother. I thought about a Tuesday afternoon when she got in her car to come pick me up and never made it. I thought about my grandfather sitting in this house for 2 years after she died, signing papers he trusted his son to explain, not knowing that trust was being used as a tool. The family, I said, was already gone. They left the next morning. No fight, no confrontation, no ultimatums. They packed their bags and they got in the car and they drove away and the house got quiet again. My grandfather and I ate breakfast together. Scrambled eggs and toast. He ate more than he had since I'd arrived. Are you scared? I asked him. Meaning the legal process, the months ahead, all of it. He shook his head. I've been scared for 2 years, he said. I'm not scared anymore. The APS investigation took 4 months. The civil claim took longer. I won't go through all of it. The depositions, the back and forth. The letter my cousin sent me through her own attorney that used the phrase, good faith misunderstanding, 6 times. I'll just say this, by the time it was resolved, every dollar that had been moved out of that trust had been accounted for. A repayment agreement was signed. The attorney's fees came out of what they returned, not out of what was left. My grandfather didn't make it to the end of the process. He died 7 months after I arrived, on a Thursday morning in early spring, with me sitting beside him. It was quiet. He was ready. He left me the house and what was left of everything else. I didn't stay in Tennessee. The house is rented now, to a young couple with a dog who sends me photos sometimes because they know the house has history and they treat it well. The money went into an account I haven't touched much. Some things feel like they need time before you know what to do with them. My uncle sent me a text the week after the funeral. Just, I'm sorry for your loss. I read it. I put my phone down. I didn't reply. There is no good version of what happened. There's no ending where everything gets repaired and the family photo looks normal again at Christmas. My grandfather knew that. He wasn't trying to fix anything when he put my name on that shoebox. He was trying to make sure that when it was over, the truth would still be standing. It is. I keep the shoebox on my shelf. Not for the documents. Those are all filed properly now, with the attorney, with the court records. I keep the empty box because of the masking tape label. My name, in his handwriting, in black marker. He wrote it 8 months before I arrived. 8 months before I drove 17 hours through the night because some voice in me said to come anyway. He knew I would. I've thought a lot about the shoebox. Not what was inside it. I know those documents by heart now. But the act of making it. My grandfather, alone in this house. Handwriting pages of account numbers and dates while his son was taking his calls and his daughter-in-law was rearranging his kitchen, sealing the box with rubber bands. Writing my name on the tape in black marker. Putting it on a shelf and waiting to see if he was wrong about the people he trusted. He wasn't wrong. And I think he always knew he wasn't. That's the part that stays with me. Not the money, not the legal process, not even the silence from my uncle's side of the family that is stretched on now for over a year. It's the fact that my grandfather saw what was happening clearly and chose to do something about it anyway, quietly, methodically, without telling anyone. He didn't rage. He didn't confront. He documented. He planned. He found an attorney on his own. He filed a complaint on his own. And then he waited for the one person he believed would show up when it mattered. That's not luck. That's character, built over decades, showing up at the end of a hard life in the form of a shoebox with a name on it. I think about what it cost him to get there. He had to admit to himself that his son had been stealing from him, that the trust he'd extended, out of grief and love and the ordinary human need to believe the best of the people closest to you, had been used as a door left unlocked. That's not a small thing to sit with. Most people don't sit with it. They explain it away, they minimize, they find a version of events they can live with. My grandfather didn't do that. He looked at what was true and he decided that the truth was worth more than the comfort of pretending. That's what I mean when I think about intelligence as something beyond being smart. Douglas was smart. He knew the accounts, the legal language, the way to move money without obvious fingerprints. But he didn't think about the one variable he couldn't control. The kind of person my grandfather actually was. He underestimated a quiet man with a long memory and more patience than anyone around him had ever bothered to notice. That miscalculation cost him everything he'd spent 2 years building. There's something in that worth holding on to. Not as a story about karma or punishment. I don't think the universe runs like a ledger. I think it's simpler than that. People who operate through deception have to keep building the deception. It gets heavier. It requires more maintenance. And the whole structure depends on everyone around them staying exactly as unknowing and passive as they were on day one. The moment one person starts paying attention, the whole thing becomes fragile. My grandfather paid attention. I drove 17 hours because something in me said to. And the shoebox was already there. Already waiting because he'd been paying attention long before I arrived. I'm not the same person I was before that drive. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. I mean that I understand something now that I only half understood before. That showing up matters more than being invited. That quiet people are not always powerless. And that the most important things anyone can leave you are not always the things with dollar amounts attached to them. My grandfather left me a record of what integrity looks like when it's expensive. When it costs you something real to tell the truth and you do it anyway, not because anyone's watching, but because you decided that's who you are. I keep the empty shoebox on my shelf. I look at my name in his handwriting sometimes, and I think he chose me before I chose him. That's the thing I'll carry the longest.